The year 2020 will certainly be remembered for one of the most significant global pandemics in history, which caused havoc across the globe and continues to today. The pandemic has challenged leadership, resources, and resilience of countries across the globe. Despite these challenges, students across higher education institutions still decide to lead. This is why.
Hi. So I started my leadership journey because I noticed my community was going through a certain change, and I took it upon myself to guide them through this change. Now, this was important because change is a part of life, and all change can be good or bad, but stagnation is unfortunately objectively bad. So therefore, it's important for us to be advocates of this good change and to, create good spaces. And how this would look forward is simply to speak truth, and this is important because communication is such a big part of leadership, because out there's so many negative and sort of like breaking narratives that are floating around, and it's up to leaders to create and to speak and to build good and true things, because the reality out there is not necessarily the narratives that are floating around, but the reality is that a lot of people still don't have, specifically in our context of education, access to anything and to everything that is available. So for definitely for student leaders' point of view, to create spaces where everybody can get towards this development and can take part in this change and feels almost welcome and enabled to transform not just themselves but the community that they come from and the society they take part in.
The reason I decided to lead in my space, especially the special needs space, is because I am a student with a disability first. So I understand the challenges that students with disabilities face on campus. And I decided to take up this role in leadership to ensure that the next generation of students don't go through the same struggles that I've been through, and also to create a more inclusive university experience for students coming to Stellenbosch, especially students with disabilities, and to ensure that they feel welcome, they feel comfortable, and that they don't have to worry about their disability affecting their student experience on campus. The pandemic just created a lot of confusion, especially with the changes in levels and procedures, but it also created a lot of opportunities for young people, for students, for young adults, professionals, because it forced us to be innovative in our everyday life. It forced us to create problem-solving skills, or to learn more about the different spaces, to learn more about how to change and be flexible and adaptable to different changes that we get faced with. But that being said, it's also been very stressful. It's very difficult being isolated and away from people for such a long period of time.
Stand by in 2.
Hello everyone, my name is Viwe Kobokana and I'm the SRC Transformation Officer. I chose to lead within the SRC structure because I wanted to make a very big difference in the lives of a lot of different students, and particularly those whose identities fall within marginalized groups. It was very difficult being a leader during the pandemic, especially as an SRC member, knowing that the pressure of my representation of students will bring the outcome of their student experience in the university this year. However, with that being said, I believe that it was through these challenges that my leadership skills were affirmed. I was able to learn and grow and know that I am a strong, resilient, hardworking and decisive leader, and I wouldn't have had it any other way.
Fantastic.
I decided to become a student leader because my fellow peers had dying issues and I wanted to be the person to resolve these issues, to become a voice for them. COVID-19 came along and it drastically impacted this, as I was no longer able to have hands-on experience with students. I had to find innovative ways to help students while they were at home to solve their issues, whether it was technological issues, whether it was data issues, etc. As students, we are no longer able to help other students within a lecture room or with study groups. We now have to revert to using an e-commerce platform to do these things, and it's not always the most reliable and effective way.
One of my favorite poets, Walt Whitman, said, "Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes." By utilizing my unique multitudes that give me this diverse perspective with which I navigate the world, I felt that it would be an injustice to not at least try to use this in order to create meaningful impact. It is what motivated me to become a leader within the spaces that I occupy. The university experience is extremely unique. It is a growth period filled with social stimulation, mental stimulation, and the list goes on. Unfortunately, students were forced to be resilient and innovative in the ways that they sought out connection and balancing multiple roles in their lives.
And my leadership journey at Stellenbosch University began 3 weeks into my first year. I have since led in a variety of structures and believe that what drives me is the understanding that leadership is a lifestyle, one that yearns for consistently lending a helping hand to those who need it, and consistently helping this institution reach its goals of becoming a world-renowned institution globally recognized for its inclusivity, for its innovation, and for its transformative student experience. COVID was an important lesson for student leadership. It taught us to be creative, to be innovative, and to be resilient. And I hope that it will continue to be a life lesson on what it means to be a student leader.
First, I think that the reason that leadership is always a matter of circumstance. That the reason I chose to throw my hat in for a leadership position was because of circumstance, but also it was a response of hope. I also think that leadership under COVID-19, in the midst of COVID-19, the pandemic has required that we reimagine what leadership is, that we redefine it, and also that we realize that leadership is foundationally a very relational matter, that one can only lead those who one is in relationship with. And then thirdly, what do I think was exacerbated by the pandemic? I think for students and for student leaders particularly, I was very concerned, I am very concerned about mental health, but also student wellness in its totality. I think COVID-19 has reminded us of the importance of our wellness.
My experience of leadership during COVID-19 was that a lot of leaders grew a lot through the baptism of fire and had to develop the character trait of not panicking under difficult circumstances, and there was lots of uncertainty. Things were changing the whole time, but you had to just do your best in every situation and adapt the whole time. And I think that's a good quality that was challenged in leaders. And another challenging thing was that people were isolating, which makes it difficult to communicate to everybody and know the needs of the people you're leading, and to get everybody on the same page and to serve them well. It's all challenges involved with that. And my reflection of the student life, the effect that the pandemic had on that, and the pressure it put on that, I think it put a lot of pressure on the social lives of students and the mental health of students, just coping with the pressure of academics in your home environment, which is different for every student. Being in community, you have the advantage of being encouraged by your friends, the comfort of your friends, and being challenged by the people around you. But as soon as you're at home, you have to take initiative in those things on your own. And you have to learn self-discipline, which I think was very heavy and very difficult for lots of students.
I believe it is important to use what you have been taught, not only for yourself, but to further improve the lives of others. COVID-19 has been strenuous for everyone. The past 2 years have certainly tried people's communication and leadership techniques. While it was not an easy transition and through many ups and downs, my executive committee and I were able to make it work through effective communication, by setting our goals that we wanted to achieve, and finally, through being agile in the way in which we approached our projects. This has allowed for EWB to effectively continue to create impact throughout the pandemic, albeit in different ways. I think what added to my leadership experience during COVID-19 was having a strong executive committee and support system in place. It's important during times like these to understand that everyone is under immense pressure and stress, and to realize that it's okay to make mistakes. While COVID-19 certainly put an increased pressure on me, I was able to effectively navigate through this by emphasizing the importance of and working on my communication skills with those around me.
In reflecting on the pandemic and student leadership and the student experience, I think one of the biggest things that stands out to me is how student leaders have had to adapt to the challenges that came with the pandemic, as well as leading under the pandemic, such as leading remotely and such. But equally, reflecting on the student experience, I think a lot has changed. The pandemic has forced universities and students to adapt to learning remotely or taking a blended approach to learning. It's also placed pressure on institutions to bridge that digital divide that exists, and all different sectors of institutions, such as residence spaces, adapting to COVID protocols, and just ultimately the way in which a university operates and teaching, learning and research is delivered.
When it comes to COVID-19, I think there are three really important points you should always take into consideration. Firstly, how important is it that what you are deciding to do takes place in that particular way? For example, is it necessary for this discussion to take place live? Is it necessary for this voting to take place on a platform that's not accessible to everyone? Always scrutinize necessity in order to determine if you're using the most optimal platform possible. Secondly, because all your constituents are not always in the space around you, it is very important for you to invest in marketing and branding in order to ensure that your spirit is kept alive online and people are always fully engaged. Thirdly, ensure that when you are having important discussions such as destigmatizing COVID-19 or discussing mental health, you don't just make it a placid photo or poster on your platforms, but ensure that you really discuss all that goes into the discussions that you're having so that people feel as though their voices are really heard and seen.
Regardless of adversities, one is reminded by the renowned American author and disability rights activist, Helen Keller, that character cannot be developed in ease and quiet. Only through experiences of trial and sufferings can the soul be strengthened, ambition inspired, and success achieved. Amidst the global crisis brought about by the pandemic, there is a growing need for more accountable leadership on a global scale, an observation shared by the United Nations Global Compact Organization. But what does it feel like for student leaders leading during the pandemic? The emergence of more accountable leaders starts with the understanding of contextual global influences impacting society. How to work collaboratively in responding to social needs, which all begins with self-awareness. What are my strengths? What is my understanding of my leadership role? And how do I hold myself accountable as a leader? All of which centers around the self. The pandemic has showcased the resilience of society and its readiness to face disruptions, operate in change, and adapt. Connecting to one another has taken on a whole new meaning. It has shown that together we lead this world.